Guys, we're going to have to postpone the start of the show. There is a sock on my floor. It could be a tripping hazard. Hold on. We got to put it out. Put it out. How's it going, everybody? Hope your week is going well. My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. And I am already getting a phone call. Nobody ever calls me from Alabama. I don't know anyone in Alabama. Oh, wait, I need that for notes. Anyway, the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series spent this last weekend at one of the, if probably the fastest track on the circuit. Now they're head this weekend to Sonoma Raceway, the first road course of the year, one of the most winding, twisting, challenging tracks. And probably the most winding, tricky, challenging track on the circuit. So we're in for an interesting change of pace. Talking about Michigan, Kyle Larson got his second win of the year to retake the points lead from Martin Truex Jr., who won 2 more stages to add to his impressive collection. And the race itself was a fairly uneventful race. You know, Michigan's very fast, very challenging for a lot of these drivers, and the groove can potentially widen out a considerable amount. But since the repave a few years ago, it's typically been a one-groove racetrack with not a lot of passing, especially not up front. But that being said, the race definitely picked up considerably, or with about 20 laps to go after a debris caution, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. Bunched the field up for a couple restarts in a row that consistently resulted in chaos. Cars slipping and sliding everywhere. You know, all day the bottom lane on the restart was at a huge disadvantage for whatever reason. Cars were sliding up the racetrack, 3, 4, 5 wide, contact. Couldn't even make it half a lap for a couple of those restarts. And that led to several drivers like Clint Bowyer or even Danica Patrick, who were having pretty good runs, top 10, top 15 runs for the day. Both ended up in the garage as a result of these restarts. And drivers like Kyle Busch, who were leading the race and trying to stretch it on fuel, looked like it was going to work out pretty well for them. You know, they ended up getting bit in the butt by these cautions and these constant chaotic wrecks. Helped Kyle Larson, though. He's ultimately able to drive off with a victory. Helped a few other drivers get good finishes out of otherwise average days. But it was a mess. Larson's win this week at Michigan marks his second of the season, his third now of his career, and all 3 wins have come at 2-mile cookie-cutter racetracks. And in fact, if you look at the last 3 cookie-cutter 2-mile racetracks at Michigan and California in the last year or so, Larson's won the last 3. And Kyle Larson's been consistent all year. We've talked about how this has really been his breakthrough season. We saw flashes of it at the end of last season, but didn't really expect it to carry over the way it did into this year, where he's been the clear favorite in most weekends. He's been so consistent in a multitude of different racetracks. I think Sonoma this weekend will be an interesting, new, unique challenge. But it's clear that the 2-mile racetracks, Michigan and Auto Club, he just is heads and shoulders above everyone. Now, that being said, he didn't dominate the race at Michigan this weekend. You know, he led some laps here and there. Ultimately, it was because of those cautions and well-timed restarts that Larson was able to drive off and get the victory as easily as he was. You know, like I said, Truex won 2 stages. Kyle Busch led a lot of laps. You know, there's some Toyotas up there that were tough to battle with for a while. But, you know, ultimately it was Larson persevering and pulling through. And, you know, a lot of times that's what it takes. That's the mark of, you know, this being a good season for a driver, when he's able to catch breaks like that, when he's able to, you know, win races that he didn't necessarily have the best car in. You know, those are the marks of a driver that is on his way to having a great playoff run this season. You know, luck has fallen on Larson's side for most of this year. But hey, that isn't to say Larson hasn't run really well this year. I mean, he's leading the points. He's got 2 wins. It's like tied for second most wins in the series. You know, he's been good. There isn't a whole lot else coming out of the Michigan race weekend, not a whole lot else to talk about, but I will mention one other thing I'll talk about a little bit, because I'm sure it was one of the most hotly discussed topics, especially among some of the most vocal NASCAR fans on social media after the race. The big debris caution, you know, with 21 laps to go. You know, all race long there had been a lot of trash flying around. Drivers, crew chiefs, spotters were all talking about trash bags. In fact, they even had a caution early in the race for a giant, like, trash can, hefty size bag in the middle of the racetrack. So, yeah, there was a lot of garbage floating around, a lot of tough stuff for spotters and officials to see. But it's easily safe to say that the entire dynamic of this 200-lap race completely changed when a rather mischievous, suspicious debris caution was called there with 21 laps to go. On TV, they never really showed what it was. Spotters, drivers alike were kind of complaining, like they didn't see any debris, you know, that I didn't know what they were talking about, so, you know, it had a lot of fans, especially those of drivers who ultimately got hosed, like Kyle Busch, you know, Clint Bowyer, Danica Patrick, some of those other drivers like Harvick involved in wrecks and stuff like that. Fans of those drivers, I'm sure, were not super pleased with the way the race ultimately resulted. And I think it's worth mentioning, especially now, because even since I've been a fan, and probably long before that, debris cautions are some of NASCAR fans and drivers' worst friends in the world. You know, occasionally we get a debris caution for a bumper cover or something just sitting in the middle of turn 2. And then, yes, yeah, you gotta call debris. Like, God, there's a bunch of crap. You gotta call the caution then. Like, okay, that's understandable. People get it. But debris cautions have for many years been inconsistent. You know, they've often been misguided. Like, they've called cautions arguably for just pieces of, for like water bottles or like pieces of trash that honestly pose no danger to the drivers on the track. They've called cautions for those before. And I thought it was interesting what Dale Earnhardt Jr. said after the race. He mentioned that, you know, with the implementation of stages this year, which automatically results in, you know, a couple more mandatory cautions per race, you know, that's what NASCAR is always going for with debris cautions. They need cautions to give airtime for sponsors and advertisers and whatnot. And, you know, Dale Jr. is saying, with the implementation of these stages, why do we still have some phantom debris cautions like we've seen a few times this year? And he's got a good point. And I think in this case, NASCAR then came out and defended the next day their call with that caution with 21 laps to go, saying they saw a piece of something out on in the racetrack, you know, that was in the way. They couldn't tell what it was right away, so they called the caution just to be cautious, I guess. And you can take that explanation for what it's worth. It makes sense, but at the same time, part of me thinks they just shouldn't worry about debris cautions early at all, especially with stages now. I mean, if NASCAR is going to be so inconsistent, because I've seen times this year where a guy hits the wall with 2 laps to go, a guy in 30th place hits the wall with 2 laps to go. Clearly, you can see parts of metal coming off his car, but they will not call the caution then because they want the race to finish under green, and they want the leaders to have a chance to battle it out themselves. So they let that one slide. And in that case, that's what the fans would want. They don't want a caution being called for a guy in 30th place bringing out debris. Like, we don't want that caution, but, you know, it leads to inconsistencies. Because then if the same exact thing happens, you know, on lap 50, they're going to call the caution every single time, whether it screws your driver out of a pitch strategy that maybe he was working before that or whatever, whether it traps your guy a lap down. If that happened on lap 50, they're going to call the caution. But they won't call it with 2 to go because that's not what the fans want to see. It's an inconsistent rule that can potentially have major implications on the outcome of each race. People like to compare it to like, oh, it's a balls and strikes call. Well, no, balls and strikes calls typically don't have that big of an impact on a baseball game. One pitch here that's called a strike that maybe shouldn't have been called a strike typically isn't going to completely change the outcome of the entire game. That's just one pitch. Over the course of a baseball game, there's like 200, 250 pitches usually thrown between both teams. In NASCAR, there's 4 or 5 cautions in a typical race weekend. Per race, I should say. So the timing of these cautions often can completely dictate the type of strategy, the type of tires, the type of, you know, dynamic between crew chiefs deciding between track position and tires and fuel and whatnot. It can completely change all that, even on lap 15. And NASCAR is really in a lose-lose scenario when it comes to debris cautions. And I think as a result, in the long term, NASCAR fans like us are just going to have to live with some bit of inconsistency. I mean, look at it like this. If NASCAR were to just dictate, okay, if we see something on the racetrack, we're going to call a caution no matter what, we'd get those cautions called with 2 laps to go when we really think, oh, there shouldn't be a caution there. But if they're going to be consistent and they see a piece of a Smarties wrapper or something on the racetrack, they got to call the yellow, and we're going to be annoyed, but they're just going to be being consistent. So they can't win with us there. But then if NASCAR just decides, oh, we're never going to call debris cautions, you know, we will see drivers cut tires. We will see drivers start to complain like, hey, there's clearly a bunch of crap here in turn 1. Why are we not under the yellow flag? You know, well, there'll be complaints from both sides either way. So I think NASCAR is doing the best job they can. You know, I think officials are trying to, you know, keep the drivers safe as best they can, but also keep the racing exciting and not overly affect the outcome of the race. And to be 100% fair, after they called that debris caution, you know, like I said, the next couple restarts, there were wrecks all over the place, people running under each other. It was pretty wild racing, entertaining, I'm sure, for a lot of fans. So as far as NASCAR is looking at it from afar, they're probably not really too concerned with the fact that that debris caution happened to be called. But in the end, you know, in the long run, the way I see it, NASCAR fans and drivers alike will always have a little bit of something to complain about with debris cautions. The same way NFL fans often complain about pass interference penalties, or basketball fans have to complain about fouls and shooting violations, all these different things. You know, there's always going to be an error of a human element to the sport that is not always 100% predictable and isn't always going to turn out the way you want it to turn out, or the way you think it should turn out. So we'll see how it plays out. Hopefully Homestead at the end of the season doesn't come down to a debris caution in the final couple laps. That would definitely be annoying, but we'll see how it goes. Looking ahead to Sonoma, because I do want to talk today a little bit about road course stuff, because this is our first Cup Series road course of the season, you know, and we got Watkins Glen in a few weeks. You know, this is interesting. Everyone likes to look at the road courses. It was announced, you know, a couple months ago or a few weeks ago that NASCAR would be adding a road course to the 2018 playoff schedule, you know, with the Charlotte infield road course being added. And so I guess for at least the time being, the debate between should we add a road course to the Chase is, you know, kind of over. Well, they did. But coming into this race weekend at Sonoma, you know, we have several big-name drivers on the bubble now in the chase still. I've talked about in the past with Logano, Kenseth, Clint Bowyer, Dale Earnhardt Jr., Eric Jones. A lot of these drivers, big names on the chase bubble. Coming into Sonoma could definitely shake things up. Clint Bowyer had a tough result here at Michigan this last weekend, but he has won at Sonoma in the past, so this could be a big weekend for him to jump himself back into playoff contention. Interesting things like that. Looking ahead to Sonoma, we got to look at the typical road course ringer names. You know, AJ Allmendinger's always been good at road courses. Clint Bowyer, like I just mentioned, is good. Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick. You know, these are just a few guys that have had decent success. You know, they've run well typically at places like Sonoma. I think it's a safe bet. And, of course, Jimmy Johnson. You can never write Jimmy Johnson off any track we go to these days. You know, it's going to be interesting these are guys to look out for. It's also worth noting, I read the other day, Darrell Wallace Jr. has been filling in for Aric Almirola, and they announced a couple weeks ago that he was going to be filling in. They acted like for the rest of the season, or at least until Almirola is healthy. Well, that has changed. This weekend they have recruited a new driver, Billy Johnson, to drive the 43 car this weekend at Sonoma. I guess he's a road course ringer, so they wanted him for that. But in my opinion, I look at this as, you know, this is already kind of a wash season for Richard Petty Motorsports, especially for that 43 car. I mean, they're not making the playoffs. You know, Almirola may not even be back this season. I feel like this is the perfect opportunity to get Darrell Wallace Jr. some pretty good experience at a road course. And we know he's driven at road courses before in the Xfinity Series, but correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think he's ever driven a NASCAR stock car at Sonoma. I might be wrong about that. If he has, at least I know he has not driven a Cup car at Sonoma, so there's still experience to be gained from that. I think this is an odd opportunity. Does Richard Petty Motorsports really think they're going to win this race with Billy Johnson? Maybe they will, and prove me completely wrong. Maybe it'll be like Justin Marks a few years ago during that rain-out race in the Xfinity Series where he just blew everyone out of the way on a road course during a rainstorm. Maybe it'll be like that, and he'll come out of nowhere and smoke the field, but I don't think so. So I'm kind of surprised that they're not letting Darrell Wallace Jr. run this weekend. But aside from that, you heard kind of my picks. If I had to make a single pick for this weekend, I'm going to go with Clint Bowyer. He won here at Sonoma back in, I guess it was, what, 2012, I believe he won at Sonoma? Back when he was still with Michael Waltrip Racing. You know, that guy, Bowyer's back with a good team for the first time in the last couple of years. I think he's going to be, I think he's going to be amped up. I think he's going to be tough to beat. And I do think it'll be interesting to see how the rookie drivers / young drivers in general do this weekend at Sonoma. You know, when I think of Chase Elliott, Ryan Blaney, Eric Jones, you know, Kyle Larson, I don't necessarily think of them all as super great road racers. I might be proven totally wrong. Maybe they have something up their sleeve that I'm not totally aware of. Not saying they're bad at road courses, but that's just, I don't think of them as that being their specialty in any way. So this race weekend could be very interesting to see how some of these drivers handle it and see how they fare throughout the entire race. Should be exciting. I'm looking forward to it. Sonoma's a very interesting looking racetrack. It's a new challenge with all the dirt, sand. It's twistier, windier than any other track on the circuit. You know, it's always a fun one. Although it'll be tough to live up to last year's expectations. Y'all remember with Stewart and Hamlin on the last lap? That's going to be tough for Sonoma to live up to that one. But I'll keep my expectations high. Thank you guys for watching today's episode of Out of the Groove. Hope you guys enjoyed it. You can follow me on Twitter, Patreon, support me there. There's all sorts of stuff in the description. Thanks for checking that out. W Cup Series Season 8, you know, the NASCAR stop motion stuff. Yeah, that's going on. I got Race 3 came out just a few days ago at a figure eight track. I don't know how to trace what's an 8. That's up as well. You can check that out. As for Out of the Groove, new episodes every Thursday. Y'all know the drill at this point, hopefully. If this is your first episode, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you stay tuned for more, because it should, as the season goes on, hopefully these episodes continue to get more and more exciting, more dramatic, as more stories develop in the NASCAR season. So it should be great. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you as always for watching, guys. Have a great weekend. I'll see you next week. Goodbye.